Judson, so nice to have you.
Thanks for having me. So I'm an addiction psychiatrist and neuroscientist. I specialize in anxiety and habit change. I'm the director of research and innovation at Brown University's Mindfulness Center. Founded a company called Mind Sciences that makes apps for habit change. We've got one for smoking called Craving to Quit, one for emotional and overeating called Eat Right Now, and one for anxiety called Unwinding Anxiety. So,
Awesome.
Yeah.
I was having panic attacks. They started for me probably when I was 16, and I didn't know what they were. I'd never heard of them and never had a word for it, probably until my 20s. They started coming back when I was homeless and was getting agoraphobic. And one thing I realized was I either felt like this or I felt like this. And that's the way I talked about it. Now there's language for dilated and contracted. But I just knew that when I felt calm and happy, I felt like this. And when I felt anxious, I felt like this. And I needed to go from this to this. So I kept trying to find ways. And I stumbled on gratitude. I realized that every thought, feeling, or action led me to one of these two states. And I started creating these really long lists. It was like, I guess all I had. I didn't have any resources. So I'd start saying, this feeling makes me do this. This feeling makes me do this. And so I remember the very first time I started to be able to head off a panic attack or a highly anxious state. For people that don't know what mindfulness is, it's actually a question I get a lot. It's such a weird word. It's like this catch-all word. Be mindful. But you're not supposed to be in your mind, and it's kind of a confusing label, actually. So what is mindfulness in your definition?
Awareness is something we all know. We're either aware or we're not aware. So that's one component that's in mindfulness is are we aware or not? Are we lost in a thought stream, worrying about the future, regretting the past, whatever. But there's also this attitudinal quality that actually gets at this closed versus open state, where this attitude of curiosity, of just not saying, oh, I see that, I'm aware of it, but I don't like it, and pushing it away, or, oh, I see that and I like it, I'm trying to hold on to that. Neither of those are really the core qualities of mindfulness. I think of it as awareness, that we're just open to what is. We're curious about what is. So that attitudinal quality comes in as well with the awareness. So I think of it as awareness and this attitude of curiosity.
I define mindfulness as conscious presence. So that's what I've just been saying. I'm like, you're just being willing to be consciously present. You talk about habit loops in your book really beautifully, and how it's based on the behavioral science that was pioneered in the 1800s. Would you talk about that a little bit? Basically,
we learn through feedback, right? And so you're talking about feedback, anxiety giving you feedback, and you could learn from it. So that's basically how we learn. So for example, if it was actually set up to help us survive, and it only has three core elements, right? A trigger, a behavior, and a result. So if we see some food, we eat that food, that's the behavior. And then the result is our stomach sends this dopamine signal to our brain that says, remember what you ate and where you found it. So it's about helping us remember where food is and also where danger is, right? You see danger, you run away, and then you survive. There's the reward. And so it helps us, find nutrient and avoid danger. But that old part of the brain actually has a newer part of the brain kind of layered on top of it, literally called the neocortex, the new brain, which helps us survive in a different way, which is through thinking and planning. But that part of the brain needs information. So this is actually where anxiety comes in. It's a fascinating story. So this old survival brain is still at play, right? But we all have refrigerators, right? We don't really need to forage for food anymore. We know where the restaurants are, whatever. But our brains are still trying to plan for the future and say, well, let's use this really strong learning mechanism. So they try to plan, but we need accurate information to do that, especially now. There isn't a lot of accurate information out there, around, this whole pandemic and all this stuff. But it's not just the pandemic. I even think of this as BC, before coronavirus, there was still anxiety. And it's just our minds kind of spinning out in these what if habit loops. So you're talking about taking the past and projecting to the future. That's actually what our brain does, is it takes past information and tries to assume what's going to happen, or project, okay, based on what happened in the past, this is going to happen in the future. But we need something, similar in the past to be able to project that into the future. Actually, I wrote a New York Times article about this that kind of highlights where all these things have come together with the coronavirus, where, nobody's really lived in a pandemic like this before. 1918 was the last big one like this and all this. So our brains are going in hyperdrive and getting anxious because in these what if habit loops. And then you add to that social media, which is like, you can distance yourself from somebody to not catch a virus, but you can go on social media and somebody can sneeze on your brain from anywhere in the world. Right? So
you're talking about the contagious nature of fear and anxiety. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a scientific term for it called social contagion, how appropriate. So we can see how not having accurate information gets us to go online or call somebody or watch the news to try to get that information. That's just our brain trying to help us survive. But when we don't know how our minds work, we're just going to get sneezed on and catch that fear or that scarcity or whatever and freak out and then spread that to somebody else.
Getting people comfortable with stepping into the unfamiliar and building some muscle around that is a really important thing, because we all say we want to change, but at the end of the day, we really don't, because we kind of would prefer the misery we know, because we don't have systems for change. So what I'm really trying to do with this book is help supply people with some exercises and some systems to help ease them into an entirely new paradigm shift. Do you have any tips for people of how to get comfortable with that really frightening feeling when you're like, I want to change, but I don't know how? Because really, where do you go to school to learn this? I mean, there's really nowhere to learn it.
So I would say two things. One is, and we've actually embedded this right in our apps. And we just finished 2 clinical studies with our unwinding anxiety app, for example. We just published a study with anxious physicians, right? So this is really appropriate right now. We got a 57% reduction in clinically validated anxiety scores when we taught them a couple of things. One was help them understand how their minds work, right? Map out these habit loops around worry and anxiety. Then see how unrewarding worry is, right? Planning helpful, worrying about every possible thing that could go wrong, probably not so helpful. Our thinking brain actually can't think when we're worried. But the third piece is bringing in these bigger, better offers around mindfulness practices. And of course, my favorite one is curiosity. And I've had people in the program who've trained themselves literally through that, it being more rewarding, that curiosity feels so much better than being in a panic attack, that they can literally, it becomes their new habit where they don't even have to say, okay, I'm going to do this now, when I'm contracted. They literally move there by themselves because their brain says, dude, why would I be contracted when I can be curious about what that contraction itself feels like? So even in those moments when we're anxious or when we're worried, we can actually hack that right there, bringing curiosity in and be like, oh, there's this sensation associated with anxiety. Oh, what does that feel like? Where do I feel it in my body? And all of that stuff.
So for people new to mindfulness, if you're wondering how to get mindful outside of meditation, if you're observant and curious, you're mindful. Yeah. So if you're worried or you're anxious or anything, the absolute quickest way to come into conscious presence is just get very curious about something in your immediate environment. So if your anxiety is escalating, become very curious about the feeling of the carpet under your feet or the smell in the room, some little detail. That's the quickest way to get mindful. With worry is a misuse of creativity, right? Worry is a form of curiosity. Worry is a form of curiosity, but you're telling yourself a lot of scary stories, right? You're worrying about all the possible things, but that is your curiosity, but it's a misuse of it. If we can take that worry and become incredibly curious about something else, we'll start to move in a very different way. And it does feel a lot better.
I agree. And I think we can even get curious about worry itself as a way to start moving, kind of co-opting that energy. Here's all this nervous worry energy. We can swoop right in there with that curiosity and be like, oh, here's worry. And in fact, there's a lot of worry happening right now. I've actually put out about 25 short YouTube videos in the last month just to help people start to see all the different ways that anxiety and worry are manifesting in this very, very unprecedented and uncertain time. But it's really about, mapping these out and being able to take that energy, because it's really powerful. There's a ton of energy in that.
It is.
And being able to kind of put that, for the benefit of good as compared to evil.
Yeah. For me, that's how I really see it. It's like all energy, all emotions it's all just a resource. It's a fuel. And so we think this fuel is feeding us, but it's actually harming us. We confuse nourishment for poison. And a lot of us do that. So we think our worry is nourishing us, but there's a much more nourishing emotion we can do. And so once I kind of get out of the emotionality of it, and I'll say, all right, my anxiety or worry is just a form of energy, and I can transmute it and transform it into a curiosity or a completely different feeling, really getting into my intuition of my gut, completely out of my head, and really go down into my gut and go, what do I need? Or it's a completely different way of relating, but it's really just learning to, like, emotional alchemy. I'm going to start transmuting my feelings. I'm going to start using them as colors to weave an experience I want instead of this controlling me. I think we've talked about this before, but Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. During that year that I was homeless, I really realized it was, I perceive what I think, therefore I am. If I could perceive I was sad, I was something other than sad. I was the observer of it. I know Descartes also used doubt as a proof of existence, which is just a horrible way to exist. Yeah, again, if I can perceive I can doubt, I don't want to buy into that. It's a horrible way I much respect Descartes, but no, thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not sure how much of a service he did humanity.
Yeah, I agree. Especially I get the logic.
And we privilege the thinking over the feeling, but our thinking brains have do not hold a candle compared to our feeling bodies. Our feeling bodies are actually what drive all of behavior. Yeah. Anytime, and we can prove this to ourselves, anytime somebody has a habit they want to break, just try to think your way out of that habit. And I say, good luck.
My whole life is really different. I mean, if you look at me going from a girl with an outhouse and a log cabin to homelessness to fame, all these different things seem like a lot of change, but there was a much deeper level that wasn't changing. And so I spent the last 2 years really studying change and creating metrics for change. How can we quantify it? How do we know when we've changed? Because what I realized is I got the scenery to change. So I was in a car. I even got my car to change. The road never changed. So I got the scenery to change from Arctic to green to skyscrapers. But that doesn't really change. It was just the scenery. It's the curtains in the house. How do you get on a fundamentally neurologically new road? I mean, how do you create an actual paradigm shift? So that's what I was with this new book. It isn't out yet. Really looking at is that level of change. And one of the things I really saw the most is people don't want to change because they don't know what's possible. Do you have any tips for people of how to get comfortable with that really frightening feeling when you're like, I want to change, but I don't know how? Because really, where do you go to school to learn this? I mean, there's really nowhere to learn it.
So I would say two things. One is, and we've actually embedded this right in our apps. And we just finished 2 clinical studies with our Unwinding Anxiety app, for example. We just published a study with anxious physicians, right? So this is really appropriate right now. We got a 57% reduction in clinically validated anxiety scores when we taught them a couple of things. One was help them understand how their minds work, right? Map out these habit loops around worry and anxiety. Then see how unrewarding worry is, right? Planning helpful, worrying about every possible thing that could go wrong, probably not so helpful. Our thinking brain actually can't think when we're worried. But the third piece is bringing in these bigger, better offers around mindfulness practices. And of course, my favorite one is curiosity. And I've had people in the program who've trained themselves literally through that, it being more rewarding, that curiosity feels so much better than being in a panic attack, that they can literally, it becomes their new habit where they don't even have to say, okay, I'm going to do this now, when I'm contracted. They literally move there by themselves because their brain says, dude, why would I be contracted when I can be curious about what that contraction itself feels like? So even in those moments when we're anxious or when we're worried, we can actually hack that right there, bringing curiosity in and be like, oh, there's this sensation associated with anxiety. Oh, what does that feel like? Where do I feel it in my body? And all of that stuff. So the one thing I would say is, pay attention, be curious. And that curiosity will help us learn everything that we need to know without overthinking it. It's really important that we not overthink this.
Wonderful. It's so nice to have you today. I would love to have you back when we can have even more time to talk, because I feel like we have so much more to talk about.
Totally.